In the dark world of gunfire and flames, the name Black Lagoon is almost universally known. Black Lagoon is the codename of a team. Despite having only 4 members, they monopolize the entire smuggling business in Southeast Asia. Whether it's the Russian mafia or Vatican nuns, all smuggling operations must first go through Black Lagoon. Each member possesses unique abilities. Rock was originally an ordinary office worker in Tokyo. While delivering a disc containing core company secrets for his employer, he was ambushed by the Black Lagoon team. Abandoned by his company, he chose to join Black Lagoon. Beneath his amiable exterior lies a seasoned businessman honed in the trade. Dutch is the boss of Black Lagoon and the owner of the torpedo boat. A former US veteran of the Vietnam War, he now handles the team's business acquisitions. Revi is the team's firepower specialist. Her volatile temper hides a disregard for life. Anyone who stands in her way is an enemy, and she will use her beloved Beretta M92 customized edition to kill them all. Benny once angered both the Mafia and the FBI in college. Just as he was about to be assassinated, he encountered Revi and thus joined Black Lagoon as a technician. Recently, the city of Ronapur, where they are located, has been experiencing frequent murders, and all the homicides have been targeting the Moscow hotel. This month alone, 6 bodies of Russians have been discovered. The balance of power among the city's factions is maintained by a thin thread. In response, Mr. Chang from the Triad invited the other 3 major factions to a liaison meeting. The Italian and Russian mafias have always been at odds. As for the Colombian drug dealer targeted by Roberta in the first season, they now dare not offend the Russian mafia. Not only members of the Moscow hotel but also other factions have been killed. It can almost certainly be concluded that an external force is behind these acts. Mr. Chang proposed that everyone cooperate to find the killer. But the Russian mafia's balalaika couldn't care less. She will not let anyone who dares to threaten the Moscow hotel get away. Due to the frequent murders, everyone in the tavern has a gun strapped to their waist. The tavern owner excitedly told Revi about the $50,000 bounty on the killer. Revi also wanted to get involved, but unfortunately, there are no clues about the killer at all. If outsiders were responsible, there would at least be some traces. Someone must be hiding the killer. The owner just asked that they not cause trouble in his bar, as his bar has already been ransacked several times. At this moment, a hot woman sat down next to Revi. Rock recognized her as Ida, who had previously traded guns at the church. However, Ida wasn't there to argue with Revi. News of the bounty on killers had spread, and many assassins had rushed over. If Revi kept slacking, the bounty would be gone. Meanwhile, people from the Moscow tavern were killed again. By then, Balalaika had already arrived at the scene. From the police blocking the area, she learned the full story from the surviving bartender. At 4 a.m., a pair of twins entered the bar, presenting Balalaika's business card to claim they had been authorized to pick up guests. The bartender, not thinking much of it, let them in. Soon after, the Moscow tavern's enforcers arrived on time to collect the debt. Just then, the boy gave a sinister smile, swung an axe, and killed the man. The girl pulled out a Browning M1918 and sprayed the crowd with gunfire. The enforcers were also shot in the legs and dragged away. They drove off in a black Japanese-made sedan, but their whereabouts remained unknown. Although the twins were white, they weren't from an English-speaking country and greeted people in a strange language. Balalaika ordered the sheriff to cover up the incident. If the military police got involved, it would be a mess. The victim wasn't just some ordinary thug, but a veteran who had fought alongside Balalaika. She had thought pairing people up would ensure safety, never expecting the killers to be children. She decided to hire outsiders for future searches and would never let her own people be sacrificed again. Just returned, Dutch informed everyone that Balalaika was preparing to deploy the guerrillas. Revi was stunned. Is this an attempt to destroy the entire city? The guerrillas were trained as veterans of the Afghan War for a potential World War I-II. Once deployed, they would become an entire killing machine. If the guerrillas were to be deployed, Dutch had already decided to flee immediately. At that moment, in a building, a group of Italian mafia members were shocked by the bloody scene in the room. The Moscow hotel official who had been brought back had been tortured to death by the twins. The man angrily told them to finish their work and leave immediately. Their mission was only to target Balalaika, yet now they had thrown the entire city into panic. These twins were complete psychopaths, and they were already planning to kill their employer as well. Rock couldn't understand why the killers, knowing who they had offended, would continue their actions. In this world, there are people called evil seeds. These individuals cannot live without doing crazy things, and they are bound to cause disasters. Their hatred runs so deep that they don't even know what they are hating. At this moment, Balalaika asked Rock which country's language the twins were speaking. Rock was initially at a loss. Suddenly, he realized the words seemed related to vampires. Meanwhile, the twins held hands to take a shower, then swapped their clothes and wigs. No one knew their true gender. Equipped, they disappeared into the city's thick fog. Rock guessed from the language that the twins came from Romania, the homeland of vampires. Balalaika had her men bring in someone involved in the pornography business and obtained twin-themed videos produced in Romania from them. After enduring a night of mental torment, Balalaika finally identified the twins' identities, Hansel and Gretel. During the turbulent period in Romania, a large number of orphans were sold to the black market to make perverted films. As an aftershow, the twins were made to assist in cleaning up the mess. To avoid becoming pig feed, the twins desperately learned murder methods to please the perverts, eventually twisting and falling completely into darkness. Balalaika met Mr. Chang at the dock and shared the intelligence she had gathered. This was undoubtedly a tragic story and a true reflection of their world. However, Balalaika sought not justice, but profit and trust. With the twins' identities known, it became easier to verify the mastermind behind them. The target was Balalaika, and the triad was completely innocent bystanders. Balalaika prepared to clean up the mess and asked Mr. Chang if he wanted to join. Hearing this, Mr. Chang readily agreed. Balalaika immediately gave orders. The Moscow Hotel and the Triad Alliance were about to launch an attack. The Italian Mafia, facing the wrath of the Triad and the Moscow Hotel, was in chaos. Verrocchio was also on the verge of madness. His only target was Balalaika, but the situation had spiraled out of control. His subordinates suggested eliminating the twins to quell the disturbance, but Verrocchio beat them up instead. He had called the twins to kill Balalaika, and the forces behind him were highly dissatisfied with his position. If he didn't take control, he was finished. The twins, who had initially left, suddenly turned back, intending to use the Italian Mafia as a farewell target. Verrocchio broke out in cold sweat as several guns were simultaneously pointed at the twins. On the other side, the members of the Triad surrounded the Italian Mafia's stronghold. Suddenly, someone smashed through the window and landed heavily on the car roof. Seeing that a fight had already broken out, Mr. Chang informed the Moscow Hotel about the situation. At the same time, Revi received a call from Ida. Ida said the situation was very chaotic, making it the perfect time for them to claim the bounty. Revi quickly equipped himself and rushed out. As for Dutch and the others, they chose to watch the spectacle. Although the Italian Mafia was in trouble, the Moscow Hotel's attack plan remained unchanged. They were determined to avenge their fallen comrades. The Moscow Hotel ordered the Triad to leave the scene immediately, but it was already too late. Mr. Chang pulled out his dual pistols and exchanged fire with the twins who burst out of the room. Due to the limited power of handguns, Mr. Chang had to retreat behind the car for cover. Fortunately, the twins had no intention of engaging further and simply left Mr. Chang behind. On the other side, numerous assassins were ambushed at the intersection, waiting for the target car. However, Ida found it strange. Why wasn't the most vengeful woman in the world on this road? If the target were to pass through here, Balalaika would surely have heavily armed troops waiting in ambush. But now, there were only a group of them here. After reasoning, Revi concluded that the twins would not pass through this place. Meanwhile, Mr. Chang knew Balalaika disliked the sheriff, so he pointed them in the opposite direction. Balalaika's side also took action. A black car sped from the intersection and quickly came under fire from the ambushed killers. The car crashed into a tree and was completely destroyed. However, inside the cabin were local children disguised as twins. Someone informed the patrol that they had gone south, so all the killers headed south. As for the twins, they were taking a small path to kill Balalaika and successfully entered the ambush circle of the Moscow Hotel. Under Balalaika's command, the soldiers drove the twins toward the designated route. Unaware of the truth, Ida and Revi rushed in to disrupt the situation, successfully blocking the twins. Gretel calmly asked how much their bounty was worth, then pulled out 150,000 from her bag to bribe Ida. Ida hesitated. But Revi didn't care. She wanted both the money and the kill. They are a pair of twin killers. They were sold into the black market to make perverted films. They eventually became terrifying psychopathic killers. They came to the city to assassinate the Russian mafia boss. But they just walked into the trap set by the Moscow hotel. Balalaika was furious because her own people were killed. She even took aim at Ida and Revi. The twins casually exchanged fire with Balalaika's men. They decided to disrupt the enemy, to track down their headquarters. So the two split up. Unbeknownst to them, even the chaos was part of Balalaika's plan. The soldiers' task was to lure the twins to the target location, then deliver the fatal blow. This farce was about to come to an end. Meanwhile, Ida, who nearly got shot, scolded Revi for being greedy. The two started their usual argument, then suddenly felt empty. They earned nothing and wasted all their effort. Just as the two parted unhappily, a gun was pressed against Ida's head. Gretel, one of the twins, was waiting for them to split up, but she wasn't there to kill. After the other twin Hensel killed Balalaika, they needed a way to leave, because the Italian mafia who was supposed to help them had been killed by them. Now that the employer was already dead, Ida didn't understand why they still had to kill Balalaika. Gretel suddenly burst into laughter. Because they did it, just because they wanted to. The dawn was just breaking when Balalaika called out the twin Hensel hiding in the woods. Hensel pulled out an axe and provoked Balalaika with the soldiers, but she remained extremely calm. Before the twins died, they had to apologize for their actions.
I said kneel!
Hensel raised the axe and threw it at Balalaika, only for his left hand to be shot off in the next instant. It was then that Hensel realized he had entered a hunting ground, surrounded entirely by snipers. From the moment he stepped in, it was destined that he would die here. Hensel laughed when he heard this. He would not die. They had walked over countless corpses, plundered innumerable lives, and could continue to live off those lives. They were immortal. For her fallen subordinates, Balalaika could have tortured him cruelly, but she found no pleasure in such lowly acts. Instead, she would simply watch him die. In another 10 minutes, Hensel would bleed to death. Only several minutes after his death could she perform a requiem for her sacrificed soldiers. Hensel lay on the ground crying in agony, before finally ceasing to breathe. Hensel was killed by the Moscow hotel, while Gretel hitched a ride on Black Lagoon by threatening Ida. She sang in the cabin, her angelic voice completely unrelated to that of a psychopathic killer. The Black Lagoon team took on Gretel's mission to escort her away. Revi guarded the cabin entrance, while Rock stayed with Gretel. In front of Rock, Gretel seemed like an ordinary little girl. She could sense that Rock was different, as if from another world. Soon, Balalaika found out about Black Lagoon taking Gretel away. Balalaika questioned Dutch, asking if he knew what he was doing. Dutch replied that it was just a job, unrelated to their stance. Soon, Benny spotted the Moscow hotel's missile ship south of their route. To avoid pursuit, they had to change course. Gretel felt downhearted, unable to see the sea. She had never seen the ocean before. She was born in a rocky mountain shrouded in dark clouds. Whether in the orphanage or Sicily, all she saw were gray high walls. A certain dictator in Romania issued a ban on abortion for the public, originally intending to create labor for the poor country. But the poorer they were, the more they had children, and the more children they had, the poorer they became. A large number of abandoned children were adopted by state-run orphanaries, becoming a supply source for secret police officers. Later, the dictator was overthrown, and the orphans were taken in by Sicily, living forever in blood and darkness. The twins wondered why the gods made them suffer so much. When they were ordered to kill other children, everyone was laughing. At that moment, they realized the world ran on killing. Rock asked if she didn't feel sad about her brother's death, but when Gretel took off her wig, her voice changed. They were one, and would forever exist in this world of slaughter. Rock, heartbroken, hugged Gretel tightly. Blood and darkness were just a small part of it. Gretel, blushing, told Rock not to be sad. She had never met someone as kind as Rock before. Gretel lifted her skirt, offering herself as a gift, but when Rock saw what was under her skirt, he silently slammed the door and walked away. Revi didn't hesitate to punch Gretel. She actually shared the same thoughts as Balalaika and warned her that if she provoked Rock again, she would kill her. Upon seeing Revi, Gretel immediately changed her expression. She could tell Revi was her kind. Rock ran onto the deck in helpless rage, unable to understand why the twins had to be treated this way. Benny advised him to turn a blind eye. The child was already beyond redemption. If someone had been kinder to them back then, they could have had a normal childhood. But that wasn't how things turned out, so this was how it had to end. The torpedo boat docked to meet Elroy, who was in charge of the transfer. He would take Gretel away from there next. Gretel smiled and said goodbye to Rock, but suddenly Elroy shot her in the head. Bloodied, Gretel stared blankly at the sky before collapsing on the dock. Elroy had accepted the bounty from the Moscow hotel. His son had cancer. With a decent reward in hand, Elroy decided to quit. This was his last mission, and Black Lagoon's task was also completed. Dutch told Rock to cover the body with a tarp, but Rock said this was fine. Let her sleep while gazing at the blue sky and sea. The most profitable businesses in this dark zone are guns, drugs, and counterfeit money. Elvis, an American gangster, hired counterfeiter Jane to make fake money. However, when the agreed time came, Jane refused to deliver the goods, citing poor quality. Elvis then threatened her in person and killed Jane's programmer companion. If she couldn't give an explanation within 2 days, the same fate awaited her. Of course, Jane wouldn't just wait to die. The next day, while the guards were using the toilet, she blocked one in the bathroom and knocked out the other before escaping. Meanwhile, Revy was woken up by the island's terrible heat. The overworked air conditioner simply gave out. So Revy went to the church to drink and chat with Ida, but the church had no air conditioning either, and the two were sweating profusely. Ida, gossiping, asked Revy how things were going with Rock. Revy impatiently complained that Rock was too weak and always wore employee uniforms, but what Ida really wanted to know was whether the two had slept together. Revy didn't know what to say and could only pretend to sleep by lowering her head. At this moment, Jane ran to the church and knocked on the door for help. Ida and Revy only reluctantly went to open the door after losing rock, paper, scissors. Jane persistently begged Ida to save her, but Ida had no intention of meddling in others' affairs. Just as she was about to close the door, Elvis shot a bullet into the door next to Ida, coincidentally shattering Revy's glass. This guy had just arrived and already provoked 2 of the 3 most dangerous women in the city. The intermediary Lobos tried to persuade Elvis not to act, but Revy had already thrown the gun to Ida. They unleashed a barrage of fire at Elvis. Angry women were terrifying to behold. Their pistols somehow fired with automatic rifle efficiency. Elvis's group was so suppressed they couldn't even get a shot off. The novice priest Rico even brought out an M60 machine gun. Lobos tried to clarify it was all a misunderstanding, but only succeeded in completely enraging Ida and Revy. The commotion naturally alerted the old nun Yolanda, who pulled out her golden desert eagle and joined the fight. Faced with such overwhelming firepower, Elvis could only flee in defeat. As for Jane, who had brought Elvis there, she naturally became the main subject of interrogation. Elvis had entrusted her with the task of forging old US dollars. The counterfeit design team was scattered across different locations, communicating online, and she was the team leader in charge of coordination. Jane had extremely high standards for the counterfeit money, but Elvis provided poor conditions and equipment, and lacked even the most basic patience. Jane went on at length about the counterfeit manufacturing process, making Ida and Revy increasingly irritable. Everyone believed it was due to Jane not keeping her promises. Jane knew gun-toting people couldn't understand her, but when Revy pointed a gun at her, she immediately backed down. Yolanda had no intention of getting involved and told Jane to use the counterfeiting plates in her bag to commission Black Lagoon. Jane tried to sell the counterfeit money to the church, but was refused. Revy, representing Black Lagoon, also rejected the commission. Seeing this, Jane could only pick up her bag and leave, but outside was full of dangers, and her head could explode at any moment. Ida recommended a hotel to her, where she could get a room by mentioning the church's name, though Jane would have to donate $300 to the church. This wasn't out of Ida's sudden kindness. As soon as Jane left, Ida traded her whereabouts for the reward money. On the other side, Elvis, who had been beaten by the church and hospitalized, naturally wouldn't give up on Jane. He assigned the task of capturing Jane to the cowboy Russell. Revy disapproved of Ida's dirty money-making methods and demanded half of the profits, but Ida insisted the money wasn't fully earned yet. As the two walked out of the bar, they passed by Russell, who was just entering. Too focused on making money, they failed to notice that the bar had already gathered various individuals. All of them were bounty hunters hired by Elvis to capture Jane. Jane's location had been identified, and their mission was to bring her back alive. However, the group was highly dissatisfied with Russell's arrogant attitude, and their response was no better. This infuriated Russell greatly. On the other side, Ida had Rock drive them to an alley. She claimed money would come if they just waited there, but Revi completely disbelieved Ida's nonsense. How would anyone come to such a remote place? Ida flirted with Rock, but Revi threatened her into revealing the plan. It turned out Ida had schemed both sides. She provided the correct hotel but the wrong room number, so the bounty hunters were fully prepared when they barged into the room next to Jane. The gunshots would wake Jane, and given her personality, she would definitely go out to investigate, encountering the bounty hunters. However, Jane would follow Ida's clues in the room to escape, likely ending up at their current location. Revi thought Ida was talking nonsense and told Rock to drive home and sleep. Just as Rock started the car to leave, Jane actually ran out of the alley. Ida greeted her, and Jane realized she had been set up. It turned out Ida had been after Jane's counterfeiting plates all along. Ida promised to save Jane if she handed them over, and with no other choice, Jane agreed. Ida stopped to let Jane in, leaving the pursuing bounty hunters stunned. Someone tried to recruit Ida, but she shot the speaker dead. She wasn't interested in such a small bounty. Then it was Revi's time to shine as Rock drove through a hail of bullets straight to the beach. When everyone learned Ida and Revi had joined the other side, they knew things had gotten complicated. Shenhua demanded Russell raise the reward to $30,000, or they would all back out. Russell thought it was outrageous to ask for more just because two small-time thugs joined, but Shenhua warned him this wasn't his Florida, and those two weren't ordinary thugs. The only fools in this city who didn't know them were outsiders. She told Russell to call the middleman to find out who Black Lagoon really was. Meanwhile, Rock drove several people to the port. Jane feared Ida would sell her again, but this time Ida had no such intention. She planned to have Black Lagoon transport Jane out using a torpedo boat. However, upon arriving at the port, they saw no ships. It turned out Dutch and Benny had taken the boat away after receiving a temporary assignment, so they had to go to the dock to contact Dutch first. Upon hearing that Revi had taken this job, Dutch could only breach the contract and discard the cargo they had just received. Fortunately, all losses were covered by the church. Jane hid in a warehouse, trying to hack into her own vault, but the firewall set by the dead programmer was too extreme. She couldn't even access her own money now. Bounty hunters had gathered outside the warehouse. Lobos called Dutch to apologize, saying those Americans didn't understand what this place was at all, and requested some time to stop the bounty hunters. After hearing the call, Benny asked Dutch if they had really been tainted by the city's evil deeds. He had thought he and Rock were exceptions, but Dutch realized there must be something deep inside them after all. On the other side, the bounty hunters had already launched an attack on the warehouse. However, Revi and Ida were well prepared, ambushing them at the door to counterattack. The Black Lagoon's newly repaired car was once again blown up by bullets. The surrounding enemies overwhelmed Revi, so she told Rock to take Jane to the back door first. Rock was now quite experienced, but just as they reached the back door, the janitor Sawyer broke in with a chainsaw. Rock, faced with a scene reminiscent of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was instantly terrified. Revi had no choice but to rush to help, but she was too late. Just as Rock was about to be dismembered by the chainsaw, he grabbed an iron rack to barely block it. Meanwhile, Jane ran out the back door, only to be chased back by the fire-loving Claude, eventually taking refuge with Revi. Revi managed to drive Sawyer away with blind firing, but the shooters outside kept firing relentlessly, leaving those inside unable to move. Revi had no choice but to toss the grenade launcher to Ida. After a few grenade rounds, they finally forced the rooftop shooters to retreat. Rock pulled down the ladder, leading to the roof to help Jane up. Exhausted, Jane scolded Rock for having no plan, but he told her to shut up while he thought. To their surprise, Claude used a flamethrower to burn down the back door leading to the dock. Now, the roof was the only escape route. The enemies wouldn't let their prey burn, so they were sure to launch a full-scale assault next, sweeping in while the group took cover. Revi wasn't about to sit idle, but just as she went to turn off the lights, a machete flew through the window. Revi recognized its owner as Shenhua. By shouting, she confirmed Shenhua's position. The fire below was about to reach them, and their only option was to take out Shenhua and break through. Revi said she would lure Shenhua to the front, leaving the final shot to Ida. Revi kept firing, forcing Shenhua toward the window. The moment Shenhua's silhouette flashed past the window, Ida pulled the trigger. Just as Ida checked on Shenhua's situation, the rope on the machete tightly strangled her neck. If Revi hadn't pulled the rope to share the weight, Ida's head would likely have been ripped off. Sawyer took the opportunity to go to the rooftop and destroy the stairs. Ida told Revi to hurry and support Rock. After handing the gun to Ida, Revi left. Shenhua then climbed back to the window using the rope. Ida shouted for Revi to act, but Shenhua had already realized Revi wasn't there at all. Yet this time, she was wrong. The torpedo boat was racing toward the port at full speed. After seeing the situation at the port, Dutch erupted in anger. Sawyer chased Rock and Jane onto the rooftop. The two novices put up no resistance. Rock could only try to lure Sawyer onto the fragile roof, but to his surprise, Sawyer happily bounced around, deliberately avoiding the weak spot. Rock and Jane were sweating in panic as Sawyer approached them with a chainsaw. The sound of an explosion interrupted her. Sawyer reached into her pocket and realized her electrolarynx was missing. The next moment, she dropped the chainsaw and became an autistic patient. Rock inexplicably escaped danger. Just as Revi and Ida arrived, the roof collapsed in flames. The group experienced a deadly slide down the roof. As they slid down, Lawton introduced himself from a nearby rooftop, only to be shot by Revi. The dock completely collapsed. Fortunately, everyone was unharmed. Just as the torpedo boat was about to dock, they quickly rushed to the pier, with Russell chasing them with his men. The torpedo boat made a 180-degree turn as it approached the pier, and Rock and his companions leaped onto the boat. However, many others also boarded. In the hospital bed, Elvis shouted at Lobos to summon his country's military. Lobos reluctantly agreed but revealed the gun handle in his chest. Black Lagoon and Russell engaged in a fierce gun battle on the ship. Rock first took Jane into the cabin. Benny warmly invited Jane into his room. Dutch returned to the control room and decided to change direction drastically to shake off the bounty hunters. Revi and Ida held onto the ropes to avoid being thrown off the ship, but another enemy kept firing at Revi. Just then, Revi ran out of bullets. Revi picked up the hammer handed by Dutch and knocked the enemy off the ship. There were now 2 enemies left on the ship. Revi dealt with the fire-loving Claude, while Ida went to the engine room to find Russell. There were still 8 hours to go before reaching the destination dock. Jane asked Rock to bring her bag, but Rock did not. It was only then that they realized the bag had been left at the dock. Jane panicked. The counterfeiting plates were not in her hands at all, but in the vastness of the internet. She only needed to collect engineering data from various locations to create them. But now the data manager was dead, and the password changed every day. The counterfeiting plates could not be retrieved. If Ida found out she did not have the counterfeiting plates, she would definitely nail her to a wooden cross like Jesus. Jane wanted to borrow Benny's computer to try again. For tech geeks, computers are like wives. Benny would not lend out his wife, but agreed to help Jane crack the system. He was curious to see how strong the firewall was. When Ida found Russell, the guy was frantically dismantling the engine because he couldn't find the exit. Claude was holding a flamethrower, suppressing Revi and preventing her from getting close. He was a complete psychopath. He killed people just to enjoy the taste of bloody combat. He even burned his own wife to death with his own hands. Unfortunately for him, this time he encountered Revi. Revi tightened herself and gave a signal. Dutch immediately maneuvered the ship to turn and throw Claude off. Revi took the opportunity to shoot at him, making him explode into a firework in the air. Jane, who had just experienced another bump, was utterly speechless. After some operations, Benny surprisingly managed to crack the code. Jane happily gave Benny a deep kiss. Rock was stunned when he saw this. This bump also knocked off Ida's sunglasses, and she raised her gun to aim at Russell. Looking at Ida without sunglasses, Russell suddenly froze. He recognized Ida's face. It seemed like at one of the Senate's dinner parties, a woman was discussing state secrets with high-ranking officials, and that woman looked exactly like Ida. Ida denied it outright. However, there was one thing she could tell Russell, that she was born in Langley, Virginia, which is said to be the headquarters of the USCAI. Russell realized something but was shot in the head. Revi asked Ida if she had sent the enemy to hell. Ida showed her the Hold cowboy hat. Oh God, another peaceful day. 1 year after becoming pirates, Rock and Revi returned to their long-lost hometown during the new year. However, it was not for family visits, but as Balalaika's translators, accompanying the Moscow hotel, which sought to enter Japan, to negotiate with local gangs. The Kanto Peace Council advocated for the expulsion of foreign forces, but the Washimin group, led by Bando, decided to cooperate with the Moscow hotel to suppress the Kosa Council. The Washimin group expanded its influence with Balalaika's backing, lighting a new lamp in the city. To demonstrate her power, Balalaika had a club of the Kosa Council destroyed with a single phone call. Bando's men were so frightened they reached for their guns, but Balalaika had no intention of operating covertly from the start. This was a demonstration by the Moscow hotel. They had come here to destroy everything that stood in their way. Bando had no objections, seeing it as fireworks, celebrating the Washimin group's development. After the meeting, Rock felt uneasy. He did not want his hometown to become a battlefield. Since there had been no major conflicts on the island recently, Balalaika had extended her reach to Japan. This was a woman who would start a war without a second thought. It was early in the year, and Revi found the roadside temple fair very fresh and interesting, so the two of them got off the bus midway to visit the fair. Revi excelled at the shooting game. Seeing Rock looking nostalgic, she asked if he was missing his family, but Rock said he didn't know why. The most familiar place gave him a feeling of being in a foreign country. His relationship with his family wasn't good. His older brother was very capable, but he himself had achieved nothing, so he didn't have high hopes for his family. Revi thought none of that mattered. Since his parents were still alive, he should go see them before his hands were stained with blood. In her eyes, Rock's family was just an ordinary one, living well without stealing or killing. Rock said he couldn't go back, and the fact that he had teamed up with Revi was the best proof. Revi gave a bitter smile and continued shooting at the targets, but the last doll didn't fall, which annoyed her. Revi pressed it down with her toy gun. She asked Rock to claim the first prize, but the stall owner refused to give it to them, accusing Revi of cheating. Coincidentally, both Revi and the owner had short tempers. Even though they didn't speak the same language, they argued using universal gestures. A man wearing sunglasses came over to mediate. Revi's temper wouldn't listen to reason, and the sunglasses man didn't seem ordinary either. The two were about to fight in the street when the girl accompanying the man suggested they sit down and drink some sweet wine. Rock raised his hand in strong agreement, so the four of them sat on a bench and drank sweet wine. The girl was a student named Yukio, whose father was the stall owner. The man, Jinji, was her father's apprentice. She realized Revi wasn't Japanese and asked about their backgrounds. Rock introduced himself as a translator for Russians, and Revi as his colleague. However, Ginji could tell at a glance that Revi wasn't ordinary because they carried the scent of their kind, but Ginji didn't say more. After resolving the matter, he left with Yukio. The Moscow hotel attacked the Kosa Council office. Police arrived half an hour later and sealed off the scene. The Washimin group had already recorded the police radio communications. The details will have to wait for Rock's translation. The Japanese branch had actually been under Moscow boss Vasily all along, but he failed to manage it properly. That's why Balalaika stepped in with her men. Vasily was extremely displeased with Balalaika's arrogant attitude. He loudly berated her, demanding an apology, but Balalaika slammed Vasily's head onto the table. There were two things she couldn't stand in this world. One was cold Russian pancakes, and the other was cowardly security bureaus. If he didn't want to get shot, he should lower his head. Bando found Ginji, who was minding the stall, and asked how much longer this business would go on. Ginji thought this was much better than gray area business, which made Bando deny that he engaged in gray area business because he liked it. The former boss had taken him in when he came from Kyoto, but after the boss fell 3 years ago, the group's finances had been in constant trouble. He stayed because he had sworn brotherhood wine with the boss and the former Kosa Council president. The higher-ups wouldn't allow anyone to succeed the boss, but someone always had to do the job. Bando claimed he was doing big business with the Russians, but he admitted the Russians were untrustworthy. He hoped Ginji would step in and show him the executioner he once was. Ginji thanked Bando for taking care of the girl with his money, but what Bando was doing now had no trace of benevolence. He had followed the boss because the man was kind and righteous. Seeing he couldn't persuade Ginji, Bando had no choice but to leave. When Bando mentioned the Russians, Ginji asked if they had brought a translator. It seemed he had already guessed Rock's identity. Rock decided to return to his hometown at Revi's suggestion. Revi was drinking coffee in a nearby park, waiting for him. Just then, a group of children ran over to play a gunfight game. Revi became interested and joined in the fun with the kids.
Only place you'll see people go down like that is in movie.
When Rock discovered this scene, Revi blushed and dragged Rock away, warning him not to tell anyone. The reason Rock returned so quickly was that his family was not at home. Revi didn't understand why Rock didn't want to go home. A simple life would suit him better. On the other hand, the Moscow hotel had planned an attack on the Kosa Council base. Bando had arranged to meet Balalaika at a nightclub. The Kosa Council was a large organization, and this level of attack was not enough to eliminate them. Balalaika decided to launch the second phase, blocking the other party's financial sources and shutting down their profitable shops and venues. Of course, this was just a diversion. Their real target was to kidnap the family members of the Kosa Council president. Bando was shocked. Their goal was to relieve the pressure the Kosa Council was putting on the Washimin group. As long as they caused enough chaos, the rest could be resolved through negotiations. Balalaika laughed heartily after hearing this. It seemed these people still didn't understand. The Moscow hotel would go to any lengths to ensure profits and take on most of the risks. The decision-making power lay in her hands, not Bando's. Bando knew he was dealing with a dangerous situation and didn't know what to do. At that moment, Bando's subordinate's phone rang, drawing criticism from everyone. Bando couldn't give Balalaika an answer immediately, so he asked for some time to think. Balalaika gave him a symbolic show of respect. Just then, the man who answered the phone took an interest in Revi beside him, especially since he knew she was a bodyguard from the island. The meeting was briefly interrupted. Rock went to the toilet while Revi waited outside. Just then, Chaka came over to tease Revi and boast about how much of a jerk he was, but Revi didn't pay any attention to him. When Rock came out and saw someone harassing Revi, he prepared to take her away. But Chaka vented his anger on Rock instead, punching and kicking him while continuously provoking Revi. Just as Revi was about to shoot the guy, Banda arrived and stopped Chaka. But Rock tolerated this because he knew Chaka's intention was to provoke Revi into shooting. Revi was relieved. She didn't plan to strike first, but she would never let it go. If they attacked again, she wouldn't hold back. After the meeting, Bando ran to Genji's house to cook. Their original intention was to suppress the Kosa Council. When the time was ripe, the Kanto Peace Council would return to mediate. They only needed to pay some money to settle the matter. But the Russians' actions undoubtedly made things more difficult. Rock went out to help Benny buy local specialties and called to have Revi's gun delivered. This place was far from peaceful. Due to the snow, the tram service was suspended, so Rock decided to take a taxi back. He happened to meet Yukio at the station, so the two went to a cafe to chat while drinking. Yukio learned that Rock hadn't gone home. She felt Rock was like her former self. She used to hate her home too, but now she understood that it was her belonging. Rock wasn't sure. He wanted to leave but had too many attachments and lacked the courage to take the next step. People are like dice. They have to throw themselves out and decide their own direction. It is this ability that makes people free. At that moment, Genji called Yukio to say Bando had arrived. Hearing Bando's name, Rock was shocked and suddenly had a bad feeling. That's right. Yukio was the daughter of the deceased Washimin group leader. After the leader's death, many took advantage of the situation to pressure them, believing that only the leader's direct descendants could inherit the position. But Yukio was the only direct descendant, and as a student, she couldn't take over. After leaving Yukio's house, Bando was followed by police. The matter had already alarmed the authorities. The Moscow hotel showed no restraint, even blowing up the Kosa Council's car in front of the police station. Then Balalaika ordered the troops to relocate. Rock wanted to know what would happen if the Washimin group defaulted. Balalaika told him to mind his own business, but Revi spoke up for Rock. If the Washimin group defaulted, it would just mean adding one more name to the assassination list. After school, Yukio had arranged to study with classmates in the library, but her mind was full of last night's events. Genji had warned her to be cautious, as Rock was also Russian. In the evening, Bando seemed to have made some kind of decision. He dressed and armed himself, threw his gold watch to his underling, and told him to go to Genji for anything in the future. Then he left with a resolve to face death. His subordinates came to Genji to explain the situation, and they would soon face the Kosa Council's reprimand. Rock's sleep was restless. He and Balalaika were attacked by Bandar in the underground garage, but Balalaika had anticipated and subdued Bandar. All she sought was destruction and suppression. She had no interest in anything else. She then killed Bandar without hesitation. Rock was awakened by Revi. A blizzard was about to sweep across Japan. After going through all this, Yukio realized she could no longer escape. She made up her mind to take over the Washimin group and step into the darkness. She is one of the most terrifying women in the world. Born into a military family in the former Soviet Union, Balalaika chose to join the army at a young age to restore her father's reputation. After countless battles, she became a cold-blooded soldier. However, after returning from the Afghanistan war, the country collapsed. Stripped of her military rank, Balalaika fell into despair, and her subordinates also fell into extreme poverty and misery. After her squad leader was killed due to debt, Balalaika finally woke up. She led her army to join the Russian mafia. Since then, they have fought in countless battles. Now they have expanded their operations to Japan, and their next target is the new leader of the Washimin group, Yukio. Yukio and her friend had just left the library. She cupped her friend's face and advised her to get along well with her mother. At that moment, several cars surrounded the empty space in front of the door. Under the escort of the Washimin group, their new leader Yukio said goodbye to her friend and left by car. After taking office, Yukio's first task was to find Balalaika's whereabouts, but the other party was well hidden, and conventional methods could not locate her. Although she had decided to step into the darkness, Yukio couldn't help but shed tears while looking at the night view outside the window. Soon after, Yukio held a meeting to announce that she would avenge Bando, but most members remained silent. At that moment, Bando's close aide, Yoshida, stood up for Yukio and scolded them as ungrateful people. Then Ginji took the lead and acted alone. Under Balalaika's command, the Moscow hotel was completely evacuated, but the Russian mafia, led by Vasily, was in big trouble. Unable to contact Balalaika, her subordinates suggested seeking instructions from the Moscow hotel first, but an angry Vasily pierced their palms with a knife. Because Balalaika was fanning the flames everywhere, the boss lost trust in her. Balalaika hated the lackeys of the Russian military, and she would never let people like Vasily off the hook. Several cars were parked outside the restaurant. The Washimin group opened fire wildly into the store. After a round of suppression, it was time for Ginji to make his entrance. Vasily's group was completely defenseless and slaughtered. Vasily was also killed because he couldn't provide any information due to not speaking Japanese. At the same time, Rivi retrieved the gun Benny had mailed to her from the US military base. She returned to find Rock looking unwell. A taxi was reporting on the casualties of several foreigners. The chaos Balalaika had hoped for had finally begun. Rock wanted Revi to accompany him to check on Yukio, but Revi, in a jealous manner, told him to think carefully about their position. Since Yukio was part of the Washimin group, she would inevitably be drawn into this whirlpool. According to Balalaika's style, she would never let Yukio go. Rock argued that Yukio was different from them, but Revi insisted that Yukio had already stepped into the dark world, and Balalaika handling her in the gangster's way was perfectly fine. After saying this, Revi scratched her head again. Her duty was to protect Rock's safety, not interfere with his beliefs, so she would accompany Rock. Balalaika bribed the hotel staff to ensure they only took calls from the Russian embassy. They already knew about Vasily's death, and this was exactly what Balalaika wanted. The domain of violence would be executed by them. By this time, Yukio had returned home only to find Chaka already waiting there. They hadn't yet sensed anything wrong. Upon entering, they found the house surrounded by thugs. Yoshida thought these were Chaka's hired help, but to his surprise, Chaka shot Yoshida on the spot. It turned out Chaka, seeing no future in the Washimin group, had planned to kidnap Yukio and join either the Kosa Council or the Russian Mafia. Yoshida grabbed Chaka's legs, urging Yukio to run, but Chaka shot him dead. Yukio couldn't escape the trap that had already been set. At this moment, Rock and Revi arrived at Yukio's house. As soon as they got out of the car, Revi cautiously drew her gun. Rock then noticed that there were scattered footprints all over the entrance. Without hesitation, Rock rushed into the house. However, the house was empty except for the dead Yoshida. If Balalaika had been the one to act, Yukio should have been killed here as well. Revi carefully examined the gunshot marks and found that they were not from a Russian mafia gun, but a large caliber revolver. Only one person would use such a flashy pistol. Genji did not smell gunpowder on Revi. Rock quickly explained that they were not the ones who fired the shots. Genji ignored whatever Rock was saying and prepared to leave, but Rock stopped him. From the footprints left at the scene, it was clear that the other side had arrived in large numbers. Genji going alone would be too late, and they were definitely prepared to deal with him. So Rock suggested that they temporarily cooperate, which would be better than acting alone. Genji agreed. Revi then stole a car and sped off under Genji's navigation. Genji asked Rock why he was helping him. Rock simply felt that Yukio did not belong here. She should live an ordinary life. Meanwhile, Chaka and some thugs were playing strip games at a bowling alley. Just as Yukio was about to be stripped naked, Rock and the others finally arrived. Revi told Rock to go to the back door and handle the situation as needed, while she and Genji would attack from the front. Language barriers were not a problem. Once the fight started, the body would act on instinct. Seeing Yukio being treated this way, Genji was furious. The two of them quickly killed all the thugs present.
Your turn, Jumbo.
Seeing the situation turn against him, Chaka pushed his lackeys forward as shields and kidnapped Yukio to escape. However, he slipped on shampoo while going down the stairs and fell to the ground. Rock, who had been lying in wait, picked up a club and smashed it down hard on Chaka. The situation here was a complete mess. Revi suggested they split up to sweep the place and meet at the pool later. So Genji left first, while Revi began slaughtering the remaining thugs.
Better start running, cause the boogeyman's coming to eat you up!
Chaka had not expected things to escalate this far, and his plans were in disarray. At this point, one of his subordinates suggested surrendering to save their lives, but Chaka shot him dead. Revi appeared behind Chaka, smoking a cigarette. Her opinion of this scum had sunk even lower. Even now, Chaka remained confident, picking up a can to challenge Revi to a gunfight. However, Revi kicked him so hard that his nose bled profusely. Such trash was not worth fighting. Revi decided to let Genji deal with this traitor. Chaka chased Revi to the gymnasium. Genji had been waiting there for a long time. The two exchanged insults. Just as Chaka pulled the trigger, Genji swung his sword and split the bullet in half. Chaka didn't even have time to react. Genji had already severed his hands and threw him into the swimming pool. Genji held Chaka's head underwater, drowning him. Rock took Yukio to the locker room to hide. Yukio asked Rock why he came. Rock believed that they had dragged innocent Yukio into this. Yukio knew that Rock didn't understand anything. She wasn't dragged in. She was the one at the center. She had succeeded as the leader of the Washimin group. Rock was furious. This world was full of slaughter and betrayal. Yukio knew what this place was, and still stepped into it. Even so, Rock couldn't ignore Yukio, who had been dragged in. Yukio suddenly mentioned Bondo, believing that his death was essentially suicide. The organization had lost momentum and distanced itself from the top. As the direct descendant of the former leader, she was the only one who could prevent the gang's decline. No matter what, she had no other choice. This was the law of the underworld. Rock countered, asking about her life then. Everyone had tried their hardest to keep her away from the conflict, but she still chose to step into the darkness. Yukio recalled her life, thinking that if she had arrived earlier, things wouldn't have turned out this way. She had done her best for her father and those who followed him. Rock felt that Yukio was just forcing herself to take on the responsibility, but she had no choice but to do so. Rock could only say such things because he had always stood in the twilight. The lives and futures of others depended on her. She had no choice but to fight for them. Rock suddenly remembered what Revi had once told him. Rock finally realized that his feet were not standing anywhere. Yukio had made her decision. From now on, whether good or bad, she would bear it all. She asked Rock again why he was standing there. He joined the gang yet still wanted an ordinary life. But in the end, he made no choice at all, neither returning to a peaceful daily life, nor stepping into the darkness of evil. If Rock wanted to save her, he should have saved the Washimin group as well, but he couldn't do it. Because what Rock truly wanted to save was not her, but the ordinary life he was supposed to have let go of. If he had left Yukio to die, not even the last fragments of his memories of Japan would remain. He carried nothing, not even the things he should have discarded. Yet he still clung to a trace of longing. A man like him could save no one. Yukio also wanted to live an ordinary life, just as Rock didn't want to live in pain, but she was unwilling. That's why she hated Rock. Meanwhile, after killing Chaka, Revi was very interested in Ginji's technique of splitting bullets with a sword and wanted to fight him right then. But Ginji stopped Revi from drawing her gun. Revi and Rock had done him a favor, so he wouldn't attack them, but they would definitely have a chance to fight in the future. Yukio left with Ginji. She thanked Rock for coming to save her, but she never wanted to see him again, and Balalaika's surprise attack on the Washimin group was about to begin. Under Balalaika's command, the Washimin group's outposts were being wiped out one by one. Most of the high-ranking members had already been eliminated, leaving Yukio on the verge of becoming a leader with no followers. After being scolded by Yukio, Rock felt dejected. Revi, who had witnessed Ginji's ability to slash bullets with a sword, was exhilarated and eager to fight Ginji. Rock considered this suicidal behavior, but Revi argued they were already the walking dead. Their obsession with living blinded them with fear, but if they had no fear at all, she could take on the entire world. Rock insulted her by saying her interests were rotting in a stinky ditch, which left Revi feeling hurt. Meanwhile, Yukio met with Kosa Council President Masami. Despite being the direct descendant, Masami refused to acknowledge Yukio's succession. Not to mention bringing in those Russians, how would they take responsibility for the previous attacks on the Kosa Council? As the representative of the entire Washimin group, Yukio was no longer weak. It was the Kosa Council that had forced Bando's hand in the first place. Yukio was not there to apologize or solve problems. She had gathered evidence and planned to request mediation from the Kanto Peace Council. However, Yukio knew that escalating the matter to the Kanto Peace Council would be futile. The underworld had become a place ruled by desire, where morality no longer existed. The Washimin group's numbers had dwindled to 30% after the Moscow hotel attack. Defeating the Russian mafia seemed nearly impossible. Yukio instructed the surviving members to go into hiding, while she and Ginji returned to the office to review the surveillance tapes. Since the Moscow hotel attack on the Washimin group, cameras had been installed at every outpost. Although most were destroyed, some fragmented footage remained. Ginji noticed that the enemy's transport was a van with electrician labels. The next day, 2 robbers drove an electrician's van with guns into the bank. After stealing a large sum of money, they left. The robbers tore off the van's label and removed their hoods, revealing themselves to be Yukio and Ginji. Soon after the police were alerted, they began searching for the van with the electrician's label. Yukio had planned to use the police to investigate the Moscow hotel. She envied Rock's vast world outside. She had heard of a city full of villains and thought it wouldn't be bad to be a gangster there. But if they were going there, they would have to settle things with Balalaika. Soon, the police discovered the electrician's van at the Moscow hotel. Yukio quickly thought about how Balalaika had arrived and how so many weapons had been transported to Japan. She speculated that it was by ship. Balalaika naturally noticed Yukio's small countermeasures, but this only strengthened her resolve to eliminate Yukio. With Balalaika gone, the balance in Rowanapur collapsed, and chaos erupted on the island. The Triad tried to stop it, but with little success. This was the true nature of the island. Benny was glad Rock wasn't there, as he was the worst with guns. But Dutch was relieved Rock didn't have to use them, estimating that Rock's bullets might even bounce back. Balalaika and Rock met in the underground parking lot. It was Rock's turn to translate again, but this time, not for the Washimin group, but for the Kosa Council. Balalaika planned to cooperate with the Kosa Council. Rock was shocked. He remembered Yukio's questioning that night. For some unknown courage, he actually stood up to oppose Balalaika's cooperation with the Kosa Council. Revi was terrified. Now, the Washimin group's strength had greatly diminished, and it no longer posed a threat to the Moscow hotel. Balalaika told Rock not to mistake his position. He was just a translator and had no right to question her actions. But Rock continued to talk incessantly. Before he could finish his words, Balalaika had already thrown him onto the car. Revi instantly drew her gun. Balalaika made Rock look at her. The word justice was deeply loved by the public. If he did not use his own strength, he was dooming others to death. Balalaika was not scolding Rock. She just didn't expect such words to come out of his mouth. Revi panicked, shifting from being firm to begging Balalaika to return Rock. Balalaika advised Revi not to seek the same way of life as Rock. Just when Rock, the oblivious one, wouldn't shut up, Balalaika was undoubtedly going to win. Nothing would be lost. but she felt that wasn't enough. Balalaika stated there were two ways to successfully beg for mercy. One was to please the person holding his life, and the other was to provide an acceptable reason. Rock met neither condition. Balalaika wondered what favor Rock owed Yukio that he would risk his life to save her. At that moment, Rock smiled. It wasn't out of favor or some righteous pretext, but his own interest. Just as some enjoyed rotting in sewers, he had his own interest-driven heroism. They were essentially the same. After hearing this, Balalaika laughed loudly. Rock convinced her to spare him this time. Revi angrily grabbed Rock's collar to snap him to their senses. They were still standing here only by God's grace. Why provoke a warmonger like Balalaika? Her task was to protect Rock, but he shouldn't seek death either. Rock didn't explain. He just asked Revi to walk through the city with him again. Even without Balalaika's words, Revi realized she had unconsciously fallen into this peaceful life. Having survived in filthy environments, she no longer knew how to live elsewhere. Only Balalaika remained true to her original self. Revi told Rock to leave. His nightmare should end. But Rock said he had already died when he met Revi. The weight of everything here was an illusion to him. He hadn't come back to return but to forget and face reality. He had regretted it a year ago, but now he no longer did. The group of kids playing shooting games came to the park again. Seeing Revi, they excitedly surrounded her, eager to witness her marksmanship again. With Rock's permission, Revi pulled out her real gun. Several shots shattered the cans. The kids were terrified. Revi and Rock shared a smile before leaving the park. At the same time, Yukio obtained a Russian Stekkin pistol. Her plan was brilliant: to leave for Ronapur, gather her scattered followers, and conquer that city full of villains. But this idea was unlikely to succeed. For this reason, Ginji had to fight his way through the Russians and challenge Balalaika. Yukio knew Ginji's chances of survival were slim, but they had come so far together, so she hoped they could stay together no matter where they went. Rock followed Balalaika to the Kosa Council headquarters. The meeting ended, and Balalaika's work was done. The rest of the task would be handed over to others. The police surrounded the Kosa Council entrance. The chief was certain the three who had just entered were involved in gang conflicts, but their identities couldn't be traced, so Interpol's cooperation was requested. Rock's mood remained heavy. Balalaika saw he still had something on his mind. It turned out Rock wanted her to completely crush the Washimin group. Only then could Yukio be fully liberated, the only way to return her to normal life under the current circumstances. Balalaika praised Rock for making the right judgment, saying his villainous career had a bright future. But this was far from Yukio's thoughts. After a break, the meeting entered its final stage. Masami wanted to shake hands and make peace with Balalaika, but she looked at him strangely. Then Balalaika proposed checking their weapons to prevent future cooperation issues. Though wary, Masami had his men hand over their guns. He believed things had gone this far, so the other side wouldn't turn on them. But Balalaika proved otherwise. After tricking them into giving up their Acutech pistol, she immediately mocked them, saying they didn't deserve to cooperate with such inferior firearms. She then shot and killed Masami. The police outside heard the gunshots and tried to rush in, but they couldn't even open the door. After dealing with the Kosa Council, Balalaika offered the pistol to Rock. Rock politely declined, admitting that although he disliked guns, he would never forget the act of pulling the trigger. Just as they were about to leave, the police finally burst in, but Balalaika completely ignored them. She asked Rock to tell Yukio that the Moscow hotel would unilaterally cease hostilities from now on because they had gone underground. She also knew that Yukio was gathering gang members to head to Ronapur. Then she pushed past the police and left. She was in a diplomatic vehicle, so no one dared to stop her. Rock seized the opportunity to jump onto Revi's motorcycle. The two vehicles drove off in full view of everyone, completely disregarding the police. It wasn't until everyone had left that Interpol arrived late. It was then that the Japanese police realized the woman was not the Russian ambassador, but a notorious Russian gang leader. At the same time, Rock wanted to find Yukio to tell her the war was over, but Balalaika had caused such a commotion that the area would soon be locked down, making it impossible for them to leave. However, as the two sped toward the dock, a van crashed into the motorcycle. Yukio got out and fired warning shots at Rock, demanding he take them to the dock. She also blew up Revi's motorcycle. Just escaping danger, Rock was forced into the van. He asked Yukio what she was doing. Since the Moscow hotel had declared a ceasefire, it was all over. Yukio didn't believe Balalaika's words at all. As long as she and Ginji were with the Washimin group, it would never fall. She could no longer escape the darkness. That was reality. Rock reminded her that he had no value as a hostage in front of the Moscow hotel. But Yukio didn't care. She only wanted Rock to be a witness to this desperate gamble. And at that very moment, Rivi hijacked a truck halfway and chased after them. The two vehicles collided but showed no signs of stopping, nearly crashing into the sea. Rock suddenly grabbed the steering wheel and brought the car to a halt. The long-awaited confrontation between Revi and Ginji had finally arrived. A battle of guns versus cold steel. The fight was evenly matched. People like them would ultimately meet the same fate, no matter where they went. Rock and Yukio silently watched the duel. Rock knew Yukio had once had a chance to avoid the same path as Balalaika, but she hadn't taken it. She wasn't standing there for the sake of the underworld's reputation. She was struggling to merge with the darkness. Standing in the twilight, Rock saw everything clearly. Yukio should have put down her sword and left with Ginji, but she didn't want to abandon her homeland so easily. She had rolled the dice, there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Ginji had knocked Revi to the ground. Just as he raised his sword to strike, he suddenly heard Yukio's words in his ear. In that moment of distraction, Revi, despite being stabbed in the leg, shot Ginji through the throat. The fight was over. Rock rushed over to help Revi pull out the knife. Yukio picked up Ginji's sword. Since the dream was over, the world on the other side was too far away. Then she pressed the blade against her own throat. Revi shouted at Rock not to look, warning it would leave scars, but Rock stared unblinking as Yukio drove the blade through her neck. Missing the ship, Rock and Revi returned to the island using Dutch's fake passport. Rock tucked Yukio's photo into his chest. A new mission awaited him.